Welcome back. Our presentation right now by George Freibott. Back in 1989, I ran into him. Fortunately, we didn't hurt each other. And he was a speaker at the Global Sciences Conference that year. And at that time, he was regarded as one of the world's top experts on oxidative chemistry. And I'm sure he'll explain some of that in this talk. He's got quite a resume. It's a long one and a rich one. He has been involved for many years in thermoelectric research, in Tesla-related research on many levels, and he was president of the American Naturopathic Association. He has a medical doctor's degree and also a naturopathic doctor degree. So very unusual and just really, really amazing background here. So let's welcome George Freibott.
I think I'm going to use the podium because after 3 days of trying to get PowerPoint to put it up on PowerPoint, finally did do it and got quite a few pictures and different documents that I'd like to share with you and just show you. The background originally was in medicine, ended up going into naturopathic medicine, and found out that the practice of naturopathic medicine is a misnomer, and that the founder of naturopathy, Dr. Benedict Lust, formed an organization called the American Naturopathic Association, which was the group that named naturopathy in 1900 and incorporated in Washington, D.C. in 1919. Background basically started in theology, ended up into fulfilling trying to attempt to fulfill some of what the Christians were talking about: feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and healing the sick. And so I got into healthcare work with the Seventh-day Adventists. I worked with 11 different Christian denominations, became an Eastern Orthodox priest, and then found out I was Jewish when I was 25. So it's been more like an endeavor in understanding of spirituality and religion, to the point where I'm no longer a religionist. Very much similar to what Tesla spoke about in his article, Machine to End All War, where he spoke about his personal religiosity, if you want to call it that. And I wanted to start with a statement that yesterday, when Jeff was speaking about the turbine, he almost quoted the statement about the scientists of our time. And Tesla was the one that said it. He said, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. And that the scientists from Franklin to Morse were clear thinkers and did not produce erroneous theories. The scientists of today think deeply instead of clearly. One must be sane to think clearly, but one can think deeply and be quite insane. And when I read that, I was very definitely searching for the reality of healthcare and trying to relate what the Adventists were saying, because when I was working with them as a pastor, I went into their vault in Berrien Springs, Michigan, only to uncover stacks of documents and papers that had across the top of them would say things like "not all released," "not for public view," and yet this was supposed to be a fountainhead of information for the pastors and associate pastors, which were the only people that were allowed to go in there, and it was basically their archive. And in that archive, there were writings by John Harvey Kellogg. There were writings, one of them that said homeopathy better than the old school of practice. I was flabbergasted at the papers that we uncovered it. And at the time, I was doing natural health care schooling as well. I was also working in an internship and trying to go into medicine. My family background: my dad was a specifications engineer for Sikorsky Aircraft, chief specifications engineer, and my mom was a registered nurse and a graduate from Yale School of Nursing. So I was very oriented towards a scientific orientation, and yet here I was learning what the FDA, when I called them and asked them what jurisdiction they had over naturopathy, they said none. They don't regulate quackery, they prosecute it. And I proceeded to tell them to prosecute away, and they never did. They did come out to my clinic in Priest River, where they proceeded to, well, one agent was from Seattle, the other was from Portland, Oregon, and they proceeded to question me about oxygen therapies and about some of the therapies that Ed McCabe covers in the book, Oxygen Therapies that Flood Your Body with Oxygen. But my issue was getting to the bottom line and getting to the facts of what was really true, because the data that I was seeing when I was working with metabolic therapy, when I was working with Laetrile, when I was working with a lot of the Lincoln bacteriophage, a lot of the different alternatives that I learned about from the Fitzgerald report, I didn't see the results that they were speaking of. And it kind of distressed me, because I was seeing young patients, young men with leukemia at 23 years of age that were dying, and you're sitting there and watching them waste away, and you're not trained to do anything about it. You're supposed to accept the concept that cancer is a disease that attacks your body and kills you. And I really couldn't ferret it out. I couldn't understand, because when I met a man by the name of Dean Burke from the National Cancer Institute, and Dean turned around and handed me a book called Prime Cause and Prevention of Cancer. And in that booklet, I was doing a lecture at Arlen J. Brown Cancer Information Center in Falls Church, Virginia, and Dean Burke walked up to me and he said, if you're truly going to bring out these oxygen therapies, or we call them oxidation therapies then, he said, you better take this book to the public, the booklet. And the booklet, Prime Cause and Prevention of Cancer, well, one of the statements, I do have it in the PowerPoint, but one of the statements here that Otto Warburg, two-time Nobel Prize winner, only man in the history of medicine to win the Nobel Prize twice in medicine, nominated the third time. The booklet was published by the, well, it was translated by Dean Burke. It was published by the National Cancer Institute and National Institutes of Health in Bethesda. And in the text, Otto Warburg states, he says, nobody today can say that one does not know what cancer in its prime cause is. On the contrary, there's no disease whose prime cause is better known. So that today, ignorance is no longer an excuse that one cannot do more about prevention. That the prevention of cancer will come, there's no doubt, for man wishes to survive. But how long prevention will be avoided depends on how long the prophets of agnosticism will succeed in inhibiting the application of scientific knowledge in the cancer field. In the meantime, millions of men, it wasn't politically correct, must die of cancer unnecessarily. And I was reading the Prime Cause and Prevention of Cancer, and I'm saying, what is he talking about? There's no disease whose prime cause is better known, and yet my patients are dying, you know, and all the metabolic therapy and the DMSO and all the practice I've been doing with my patients, my results were still only 20%, maybe 40% at the absolute best. And yet there was a man by the name of Dr. William Frederick Koch, who in his book, Survival Factor in Neoplastic and Viral Diseases, which is available, the book's available on the web, it's been digitized. He was having 80, 90, 100% results towards the end of his life. And I'm saying, how can he get that kind of results? I'm getting 20, 30, 40, 50. I'm following him to the letter of the law. I'm doing what his book says. I'm doing the tests. And I couldn't understand why my results weren't the same. So I spent a lot more time studying in his final book, which was the Survival Factor in Neoplastic and Viral Parasitism. He made a statement. And he says, unless the molecule of oxygen is present at the site of the cell when an injection is given of his therapy, which is called the Koch therapy, there'll be no curative progression of oxidation, and unless there's a good dispersion of tissue colloids, nutrients, minerals, etc., there'll be no curative progression of oxidation reactions that take place, and the reagent will have been given in vain. And when I began to, he's talking about tissue colloids, talking about good dispersion of tissue colloids, talking about a molecule of oxygen being present. I'm saying, how does one do that? And that became the study and the genesis of the thing called Homozone, which was a product that the Germans produced, which floods the body with oxygen at the rate of about the equivalent of about 750 to 1,000 drops of hydrogen peroxide, 35% in a teaspoon of the powder. And so that we got into the manufacture. Actually, got the estate from the Bloss and from the people that had taken over the estate, and started using it with the patients. And all of a sudden, my numbers began to jump dramatically, and the sufficient foundational support of the coke therapy by the Homozone ended up taking me down the trail of oxygen therapies until one day I got a phone call from Ed McCabe, who wrote the book Oxygen Therapies and Flood Your Body with Oxygen. He said, I'm going to do a book on hydrogen peroxide. I said, hydrogen peroxide? I said, why don't you do it on all the oxidation therapies? Oxidation therapies. He said, oxidation therapies? I said, yeah. Then I started telling him about the coke therapy and started telling him about ozone, about the Homozone, which was back then Hamozone, about a lot of the foundational people that started with oxygen therapies, which took me on the ride through really understanding and the importance of the OR potential of the cell. And that when the OR potential of the cell, or the oxidation reduction potential of the cell, is enhanced, then you've enhanced the whole body. Because if you enhance that potential in the cells make up the organs, or the organ function is enhanced. The organs make up the systems of the body, which makes up that which we call homeostasis or health. I got a little bit weary with healthcare because of once you get to the bottom line of healthcare, or the oxidation reduction potential and the enhancement of it, it becomes very simple to start dealing with all kinds of things. Dr. Koch dealt with hereditary general atrophic idiocy, things like dwarfism, and we have before and after pictures of patients. I mean, just incredible results. Childhood illnesses, 66 cases of whooping cough, mumps, scarlet fever, and all dealt with the same compound called the coke therapy. Where it was leading me was to a thing called the Basic Unity of All Disease by Dr. Lewis Kuhn. And at that point in time, I was a naturopathic medicine practitioner. I didn't understand that there was any difference between naturopathic medicine and naturopathy. Started studying the history and did one of the global sciences conferences, and started getting into the technologies in Tesla, much more heavily than in healthcare, and it was much more exciting. And then started studying the real meanings and the background. And because of an experience I had when I was 20 years old, I knew I couldn't go see Tesla because he had passed away. I ended up going and visiting with Arthur Matthews. And there's a lot of question in Tesla history about Arthur Matthews, because every time I mentioned it to the Tesla Memorial Society people, they all kind of went and looked really strangely out of the corner. Oh, he's going to start talking about UFOs. He's going to start talking about telescopes. He's going to start talking about aliens. Well, I went up to see Arthur Matthews, and he was very real. He wasn't a joke. There really is no reason to poo-poo who he was and what he was about, because as I studied the history, I found out who his father was, and that his father had worked with Lord Kelvin and persuaded Tesla to take on his son as an apprentice. And Arthur shared quite a bit with me at the time. Just prior to that time, Andrea Puharich had gone to visit him up in Canada, in Lac Beauport, Quebec, and I just read recently in the extraordinary journals, and Steve had mentioned in the article about Arthur Matthews and about Puharich going to visit with him. And Andrea had taken some of the coke therapy and had gotten well from diabetes insipidus and herpes zoster, and invited me down to the Reynolds Corporation in the retreat in Devotion, North Carolina. And I was 25 years old, and they made an offer to buy out the therapy, which I refused because they wanted me to stop researching it and being involved in it. At that time, I did the due diligence on the background and who he really was and what he was really about. And it catapulted me into a thing called Operation Mind Control. And it's a pretty, that portion of it, I'm not going to go in depth, but it ended up going into the Tesla watches and electrodes and all kinds of entrainment of the nervous system through the devices that he was promoting. And it just kept me, getting me deeper and deeper into the history of Tesla. And that's the reason why when Steve and I put the name together, I got into the wide-ranging implications. But when you start studying the wide-ranging implications, it takes you to a portion of Tesla that is just so awesome. I do have a picture. I don't think I scanned it into the PowerPoint, but I subtitled it, what were the desires of Nikola Tesla? And does anybody really know what the intentions of Nikola Tesla were and what he was doing, and what his life of research and development and his sacrifice and all of the misery that he went through throughout his life and the satisfaction that he talks about having in his research? I started seeing this dichotomy. There were those saying he died in poverty. There was those that were saying and I don't understand how poverty's in the Hotel New Yorker. Street people were pretty hard up, but I started seeing people saying his whole life was useless, and his research. I took some of the statements right from Tesla himself, because the only way that Tesla, what Arthur said to me when I went up to visit with him, was the only way that you can get to know Nikola Tesla is by reading Nikola Tesla. And I looked at him and I said, well, where do you get books about Nikola Tesla? At that time, there wasn't the publications there are now. And I got a number of the texts from the Tesla Memorial Society and the Serbo-Croatian Museum and the rest of it, and started studying it. And it led to not just reading and understanding and knowing about Tesla, and from a relationship with Arthur Matthews even more so, but it brought me into devices and technologies that I hope I have the time to share with you. I've got some pictures here in the PowerPoint. But that one's out of order, and it's a little bit bigger, but I'll explain that one a little bit. I've already read that to you. But one of Tesla's statements where he said, the first to be dispelled is the illusion of the Hertz or electromagnetic waves. The expert already realizes that practical wireless telegraphy and telephony are possible only by minimizing the wasteful radiation. Much of the research that Tesla did, when I really was getting into it, because you hear so much. Actually, the next, let me go beyond. Oop, I hit the wrong one. I'll get it out of there. Thank you. Let me go right here. I started analyzing fact and fiction with what Tesla was talking about and what Arthur was talking about. And because of my experience with oxygen therapies, and because I'd seen so many lies in the alternative healthcare field, the very facets of naturopathic medicine being a misnomer, and yet they're trying to amalgamate medicine with naturopathy, I started seeing these same facts and fictions. And when I started to see it in Tesla's work, he wrote an article called The Fabled Electron. And it was a real dichotomy with me, because the writings of Lee Skellnan, a lot of the other people, I didn't just meet Arthur Matthews. There was a man by the name of Seliger from Portland, Oregon, who also worked with Tesla. And I went over and met his widow, and ended up with volumes of and schematics and blueprints. And the man developed a transmission with no gears, totally a ball bearing. Ended up being the company he worked for tried to steal it from him, but we wrote had a journal time, and we wrote an article called Tesla and the Boy. And in that article, it talked about Mr. Seliger working with Nikola Tesla. I started tracing down, like I did with the oxygen therapies, the different sources, and ended up coming across methods and technologies where virtually the slide we saw there showed the steering wheel of the car. What that was a man by the name of Velachos, Konstantinos Velachos, who was a survivor from the Titanic. And he was drowning in the water, and this woman thought it was her niece, and she reached down and she pulled him up out of the water and into the life raft, and he survived and ended up producing a car that ran on no input fuel whatsoever. No electricity, no hydrogen fuel, no electromagnetic motors. The man basically had a fuelless car, and in a article in the 11th Hour magazine, it talked about Dr. Koch, and this fellow came up and said, George, he says, isn't this your Koch therapy that you produce and get out to the people? I said, yeah. And he says, check this out. And he shows me this. It opens up in six different ways. And it was about a car called the Fibian. And for 6 years, he said he knew where it was. I went looking. I went to Colfax. I went all over Washington State. It turned out that this man, Velachos, who had survived the Titanic, and it was one of the engineers and worked with the Grand Coulee Dam. And he had the car, he presented it to the government. The government, he said, sabotaged it. And he put it into a warehouse and into a museum, which he had, and displayed it for people till he passed away in 1986, and his wife in 2002. But as I was looking at it, I thought some of the pictures seemed to be a little bigger than what I had put in the PowerPoint. But when I saw the car, after what happened was I went to where they were buried and sat down and was impressed to go speak to somebody, a person who ran this mobile home park. And it turned out she was the wife of the chief of police, and that they knew him very well because he was slightly notorious for this car that he had. And she told me where to go and where the place was and all the rest of it. And I went there and walking around it, and it was pretty dilapidated. It looked like I was casing the joint, and I was a little concerned because the police were going by, and people at the tire store across the street were a little upset with who's this guy who's walking around this place. And I looked in one of the windows, and it was boarded up in one place, and I looked around the side of it, and I ended up seeing the car sitting there. And the technology basically was still, again, Tesla-based, but what he did was he took a Freon fluorocarbon, pressurized hydraulic oil, and then had the equivalent of like a Rankle or a rotary motor on each wheel, where he pressurized the hydraulic fluid, and the hydraulic fluid ran these motors, and the car drove with absolutely no fuel whatsoever. The only thing he had was the battery. Started the heating up of the Freon pressurized. And so I went and I checked out, and again did the due diligence, and found out there were about 20 different patents based upon this man's work, and that it wasn't bogus, that it was very real. And we pretty much redesigned it. And yesterday when Jeff Hayes was speaking about the turbine, I was quite excited because the quote that he was speaking that Tesla said basically to the world was the same thing he's saying here. We get so complicated, with me with metabolic therapy and Laetril and all kinds of macronutrients and antioxidants, and it's so simplistic that when I got into the technologies are very simplistic. And Velachos' method of driving that car with nothing more than the differential between a liquid and a gas would run the turbine just as easily as it would pressurize the hydraulic oil. Back in '89 at the Global Sciences, when we showed the Tesla mechanical oscillator, we didn't have it completed. We only had the one central unit, the one mechanical oscillator, and I was really excited about it because the machine basically was lubricationless. It was basically frictionless. There was one moving part, no valves. And the machinist who put it together for me when I went to visit with him, I had a pocket full of funds, and I went and I said, I want to just prove one of Tesla's inventions, just to see if he's telling the truth. And I already believed Tesla. Arthur Matthews I'd already visited, and I believed Arthur very much so. But I still wanted to prove it, still wanted to do it. He walked over to his counter, and there was an oilcloth, and he pulls this oilcloth back, and there was the mechanical oscillator already built. And he let me take it to Global Sciences and demonstrate it. And I thought it was the greatest thing on earth. I mean, an air-driven motor there was really no fuel to it other than the compressed air. But the man had designed it so that it would take air and turn it into liquid air. And there were supposed to be 3 units. There was a shaft coming out of the center of the mechanical oscillator, and on each shaft there was another compressor. And he was able to, and I checked with him when I found out about Vellaccio's vehicle. I went back and I said, remember when you told me that 3 gallons of liquid air put through a heat exchanger or an expansion chamber would produce 10 gallons of liquid air? And he verified it again years later and didn't deny and didn't try to skirt the issue, and very much asserted that doing liquid air through this mechanical oscillator, when it had three different pumps on it, would produce 10 gallons for every 3 gallons put through the unit. So we had already built the compression end of it, and he'd already built the turbine many years earlier. I asked him at the same time, hey, did you ever build a turbine? He said, yeah, when I was 17 years old, that was the first thing I had ever done. Basically what we did was we took Vellaccio's Freon run, pressurizing the hydraulic oil, and started to play with the turbine. And it's not as big as we'd like, but liquid air put through the heat exchanger produces a whole lot more pressure than Freon does. Freon at about 80 below zero starts to become gas. It produces somewhere around 100 psi, 80 to 100 pounds per square inch. But when you take liquid air, it begins to turn into gas down around 300 below zero. And it produces closer to 500 psi, between 300 and 500 psi. So there's much more pressure that we could utilize in something like the turbine. Every one of these technologies, we produced thermoelectric power generators that went up on, I wish I had the patents. Had I worked a few days earlier on PowerPoint, I would have actually been able to show the different patents, but there's a patent by a man by the name of Jasper L. James, and it was issued to a man, James I. Dye. And it was a patent that was issued to a deceased person. And when we were studying the patent on it, because we were looking up thermoelectrics because of Tesla's articles and data about thermoelectricity, being up in the middle of Idaho, the last place that they plowed to at the end of the world nearly, we were looking for a way to do power production. This was about 25 years ago for our home. And sitting down in the, well, we didn't have running water, it was an outhouse. And sitting in the outhouse looking at this Radio Shack magazine comic book, I look at this picture of the Voyager, and they show this thermoelectric power generator that's mounted on, I believe it was the Voyagers. And it was the one that a few years ago they reported it and said, still running after 22 years, it's still running. And they take a radioisotope blanket, a DK blanket, and they wrap it around this cylindrical unit. And the cylindrical unit, which is James's device, Dr. James, he built a thing called a thermoelectric thermionic generator. And that patent says that it'll produce 200 amps, 108 volts off the heat of a wood stove. And it can be used for backup for hospitals. And the testing that we did with the thermoelectric modules, that was because he utilized solid state thermopile that was wrapped in a thermionic emission tube. And he took the thermionic emission and the thermoelectric emission and put 2 of them side by side and had a flip-flop circuit that goes between one and the other. And while one is cooling down, the other's heating up. And it would just sit there and flip-flop back and forth. And it did everything that the man said it would do. We didn't go to the full state of building the total unit. We did all the thermoelectric studies, and at that time tested thermoelectrics like silicon carbide and carbon, iron silicide doped with oxygen. I got into the whole thermoelectric field to the point where we were able to produce single junction electrodes the size of a quarter, and they were putting out 25 volts per junction, and they're no bigger than a quarter. You stack 40 of them high and you get 1,000 watts of power. It was 25 years ago when I spoke at the International Tesla Society and Tesla Memorial Society meeting in Colorado Springs. And it's 25 years later, and I was coming to the meeting with kind of an attitude because I wasn't seeing a lot of change, and I wanted to bring devices and everything. And then when I got here and I started talking to the other people and interacting with them, I was so pleased, and I walked away last night. I'm floating above the floor because the things that were being discussed and the unity and the direction was so indicative of what Tesla himself wrote about unification, and that we have to be unified. When Jeff was speaking yesterday, all I've seen for years and years are the schisms. Everybody goes off on their own, and they don't duplicate Tesla. They do their own thing. Or like when we built the not mechanical oscillator, but the transmission of electrical energy without wires, about 15 years ago, we built a unit, and I applied for patent application just to see if we could do it. I didn't put it, the citations based on Tesla's work. We filed it as we called it the new internet, because we were able to transmit 65 thousandths of a volt, a quarter of a mile, and at the other end, a quarter mile away, on the receiving end, it came out at 130 thousandths. And it virtually doubled in power at the small. We couldn't make the flow of the electricity be anything less, because it wouldn't even light up the LEDs on the unit that we built. But it actually doubled in power between the transmitter and the receiver. And I do have a CD or a DVD here that anybody that really wants to watch it, we demonstrate it right on the CD and DVD. And the patent office did grant us the rights to patent it and put it out. They said they couldn't find anything in the patent office that even closely resembled it. So I wasn't really interested in patenting. I just wanted to see if I could get a Tesla, an actual Tesla device, approved by them and get it by them. And it actually passed, went right through their examiners and all the rest of it. But the reason I bring all these devices and different things up is because the things that Tesla speaks about, the electron not existing, and in medicine, where they say that ozone is a toxic gas, and nobody has duplicated the magnifying transmitter. These things have been done, and they've been proven, and they're documented, and I'm happy to share it with anybody that wants to hear about it. But the lies that are in the conventional sciences arena, when you're watching 28 tumors come out of the bowel of a patient, and you send them in for a pathological determination, and they ask you what the site of excision was, where it was surgically removed from, and you tell them that I don't do any surgery, I'm a general practitioner. The patient passed them spontaneously from the rectum. And MetPath and Columbia University pathologists were on the phone at the time when I did this, and the patient in a colonic with ozone, or octazone actually, passed 28 tumors. In the old days it was called colon hydrosurgery. And the patient just passed them right out at the rectum, down the colonic tube, and we caught them, and I sent them in for pathological determination, and they were determined to be adenocarcinoma of the large intestine. The pathologist from Columbia said the patient passed them spontaneously from the rectum, impossible. Put site of excision, colon. And I didn't really point out to him that it said MD-ND on my letterhead. And I didn't go into the colonics. I just let them put site of excision, colon, but I don't do any surgical. I'm a naturopath of the old order, and we work with everything natural. And naturopathic medicine is not a part of our reality. Some months ago, we had a school, which was a free school. We're doing a free school for nature people. Anybody wants to learn to be a naturopath. And we had 240 students in 1 month's time. And they took our site down. They wiped out our site. The host wouldn't handle the site anymore. And now we're going to Linux servers, a brand new school. It's going to be a free school. The hackers provided me with this incredible software for a school and put together by an accredited university. And we're pushing the issue even further. But the teaching that we're interested in teaching is the teaching that shows these things really do exist. They really do work. What Tesla talked about and spoke about, I put up a UFO and interplanetary communication because through the little journey, I happened to meet Otis Carr's confidant and started to check out the story about Otis Carr and the flying saucer that supposedly never flew. And in the process of studying it, ended up finding out the story of Otis Carr, met Ralph Ring, and we duplicated the neutrons, we put them in the spin, and we wound the Tesla coils, double cone coil, and saw results and situations happening. I had an electronics room in the basement of the clinic in Priest River that was Faraday cage to keep all with the weird frequencies in the room. And we saw a 4-inch device shake a 32-foot wall bench attached into the concrete floor, and the whole wall was oscillating with this unit that was spinning at about 89,999.971 rotations per minute. It was supposed to become weightless according to Otis Carr's thesis that any object that is rotated to a rotation that's relative to its attractive inertial mass, being the Earth, that when it hit that relative rotation, it would become weightless or antigravitic or whatever. And we took it up to 110,000 RPM. And at 110,000 RPM, the bracket that was being held in with aircraft bearings that were rated for 150,000 RPM. It had begun to push them out, not like a bad bearing or a bum bearing. It actually was pushing them out of the bracket and bending the bracket back and breaking the braze that held the bracket together on an incline. And each one of these quacky technologies people were questioning, for some reason, I happened to meet Arthur Matthews because of an experience, like I said, I had when I was 20 years old. And the background of our family and the whole military-industrial complex, I ended up having an experience, and I had to go talk to I was hoping Tesla, but had passed away. I ended up speaking with Arthur Matthews, who then started speaking to me, and because of my background in theology, showed me the telescope that he didn't show to Andrea Puharich. And we have the telescope, or a version, an adaptation of it, and we've microcircuited it, and we don't make a big thing out of showing it, but people have come up to our place. Ed Grimsley was here last year. Ed came up to our place up in Idaho and did his night vision over UFOs, and went on George Norrie's show and said he saw 150 of them in an hour's time up at our clinic. The next thing, we were getting phone calls for people who wanted to come up and look at the aliens, but it was the technologies and things that we've tested, be it from Arthur Matthews, be it from Otis Carr's confidant, a man that was called Vern, they referred to him as the cherub. When we started getting into the real history, and you start finding out the real history and what these people, what happened was Major Ahu traveled with Otis Carr. Dorothy, his wife, Major Ahu's wife, got a little ticked off about Otis being on the road all the time, and thought he was womanizing a little too much, and turned around and divorced him and married General Holdridge. And General Holdridge, I ended up meeting Dorothy Holdridge. And they told me the reality of what they truly did with Otis Carr and how they took his technology. And I was already aware of this because we had a report that was done in 1980 by NASA that shows the exact same technology, exact same diagram, except they kind of renamed things a little bit, that Otis Carr has in his paperwork. They showed in this propulsion report by NASA. And it was a real impetus to take the next step and to go a little further in studying the concepts that the man was talking about. And that's why I put him in the list here, because the things I began to see that people were saying weren't being done, or weren't being tested, or weren't true, or they didn't know how much they could trust this guy, Arthur Matthews. I sat there with the man. He was 85, 86 years old, and he wasn't sitting there blowing smoke and lying at me. He had no reason to. He could care less what I thought of him. And he shared with me, and shared, and brought me into an arena that has never, it's changed my life. The healthcare stuff is wonderful, and the background of the basic unity of all disease written about by Dr. Lewis Kuhn and Return to Nature by Adolf Hughes were credited by Mahatma Gandhi, who was a member of our association, and he credited those two books to his life's work in Nature Cure. And when I read his credits and found out that the books we still teach from to this day, and the understanding of the basic unity of all disease, you start talking to doctors about it, you start talking to medical doctors about it, and you start talking to naturopathic medicine people about it. And you'll get the same reaction that you get from some people when you mention Arthur Matthews. But bottom line, and Tesla made the statement that it was really the effectivity, the bottom line effectivity, or the reality of how the technology bottom line works. And the efficiency of it is what proves, no matter how much they look at you and call you quack, when you see the effects of oxygen therapies, it so drastically changes a person's practice that the nutraceutical, good food, good water, good air, necessary. And when I tell the doctors that I don't really like doctors, and the reason why is because I've been charged a patient 30 years, 25 years. I've been in practice about 30 years, but I've been charged a patient 25 years, and cancer, which Otto Warburg spoke about, whose no disease, whose prime cause is better known. We have people that can get over their cancer for $75, not $75,000 or $750,000, but $75. And when you start studying the history, you find out that the reason why these were the most suppressed technologies and compounds and everything else is because really there's no money in it. I mean, you can charge. I had Congressman Haley, Dan Haley, everybody idolizes, charged one of his patients who didn't even have the money $2,500 for an ampule that we sold him for $25. And when you see that kind of greed going on in the profession, you begin to look at it and say, this is not what natural therapy is about. Healing comes from within the body, from within us. And that really, naturopaths, well, Dr. Benedict Luss, the founder of naturopathy, stated that a good naturopath, worthy of the term naturopathic doctor or naturopathic physician, was that naturopath who so educates his patients that he dispenses with his own services in due time. And that's what a real naturopath is about. We're a self-defeating, self-eliminating profession, because if we're really doing our job, we're teaching people that health is something you do every day of your life, not something that you do when you get sick and go see the doctor. And it changes. It changes your perspective, the understanding that everything that exists is alternating current, which was one of the things that Lee Scalman talks about, and then taking out a meter and testing and finding out that everything that exists does emit an alternating current. Well, the next step is, well, if it's an alternating current, then it must have a frequency. So the next thing, you break out your frequency meter and you start testing for frequency, and you start to realize that everything that exists is alternating current. And there have been a myriad of articles. Last night I was even reading one. It was about, is seeing done electrically? It was all article all about seeing and all about the senses. And all of a sudden you get catapulted into Tesla's, the device that Tesla developed that you could look into, and it would put out, they have a rendition of it where it shows a screen and or shows the article out in midair, kind of suspended in midair, and it's the man's thought train, thought processes. But when I did the testings that Lee Scallon talked about, with seeing that everything that exists was alternating current, it really changed the outlook on life. Different aspects that where the government says that they have Tesla and Tesla power. When you really understand it, they're lying to us again. Because if they had Tesla power, we wouldn't be on their grid. Because half of Tesla's wave, basically the zero line on an oscilloscope to Tesla was the surface of the Earth. And if the government truly had Tesla power, which they don't, because when I brought the magnifying transmitter demonstration to them, they stuck out their hands, some officials from the Department of Defense, and they said, "How can we help you?" When I showed them that we were transmitting the electrical energy through the Earth, and they saw a demonstration of it, and stuck out their hands and said, "How can we help you?" I said, "Become my co-investors." And they said, "We don't want our name on it." And again, it catapults you into Tesla's article, "The Machine to End All War." And Arthur told me that he had presented it to the Canadian government, and Tesla stated he had already presented it to the American government, and they refused. So when we did it, when we duplicated it, I went and presented it to the officials at Wright-Patterson. They lived in Ohio, not far from the base, and they were very impressed with it. But they said, "We don't want our name on it," refusing it again. And all right, it's just kind of put a little water down. So I got into the fact and fiction of it all. And again, I don't want to go through the big long. You probably can read it just as easily as I can read it to you. But these are some of the quotations that last night I put up out of Tesla's, out of different Tesla citations, different articles, and different things. But
George,
yeah,
we do have that other PowerPoint for you now.
the other one, okay. We can go to it and show some pictures then. These are pictures from the telescope that Arthur had in his book, the Wall of Light and the Venusian spaceship. But these are just pictures that have come from different. But Arthur Matthews was a valid scientist and a valid researcher, and truly Tesla's last living lab assistant. You can get a transcript of his talk. The talk, Bruce Peralt, I think, has it, the transcript on his site, but he cut it short and actually got the tape because Arthur had sent me the tape. When I went up to visit with him, he gave me a set of slides, which were the secrets of Nikola Tesla. And the reason he didn't like Andrea, he felt his attitude was Andrea was a commie pinko. That was his attitude about Andrea. But Andrea didn't have an orientation towards the scripture. And because of my background, Arthur had these paintings and there were all these scripture verses underneath it. And he asked me, he said, "Do you know what these numbers are?" And he'd already shown me scripture verse that said, "The New Jerusalem has no need of the sun to rule the day, nor the moon to rule the night, but the Lamb of God was the lamp thereof." And I was a fundamentalist Christian at the time. Very, very distant from fundamentalist Christian now. Because when you really get into what Tesla was teaching and saying and talking about, it turns that energy people call God into the energy of all that is. And then the next thing you know, you're being called a pantheist. But Arthur, this is one of the patents that Arthur. It's actually a kind of a semi-representation of the telescope. But the real telescope that he showed wouldn't show Andrea, that I did get to talk to him about and get a look at, contained a tube inside of it that when you fired the tube up, it would ignite a unit that was a cesium vapor lamp, and was the same tubes that was in a thing called the Philadelphia experiment. And I happened to have a patient whose father was involved in the experiment, and ended up going and meeting and talking with him and all, and was interested in the project anyways because of Tesla's influence in the project and because of meeting T.T. Brown before he passed away, and numerous other people. And I ended up getting 6 of the tubes that were in the Philadelphia experiment, of which 5 I still have. That tube that was used in the experiment, which they show in the movie, those tubes were actually from the Philadelphia experiment. They were surplus that was sold to the Hollywood movie group, and they were sold from a man who was involved in the Philadelphia experiment and wrote an article called 500 Million Megacycle Transceiver, and it was all about the broadcasting of audible voice, taking an amplifier, 90-watt amplifier, and broadcasting your voice across this lamp, cesium vapor lamp. And again, like I said, brought me into the technologies that Arthur shared with me, and delving deeper, ended up with 2 and 3 and 4 different patents. He has another patent, Arthur does, but basically what I was trying to do was get to the bottom of whether this guy was really a viable, true lab assistant to Tesla, and he very, very much was. The patents he has a gas turbine, which is the Tesla turbine that he patented after Tesla passed away, and many of the rights to Tesla's devices actually were passed on to Arthur Matthews, and he put the gas turbine patent through because he wanted to show people that he truly was Tesla's last living lab assistant. The book here, The Prime Cause and Prevention of Cancer, this is Dean Burke, the official from the National Cancer Institute. This is the book that I was talking about with Otto Warburg, the 2-time Nobel Prize winner. Very shortly, we're going to be presenting this to the health committees in D.C. And put it under their nose, and really we're going to see whether or not we really do see some change, because it's the highest order of research. I mean, Warburg was the director of the Max Planck Institute, and when we put the other photos up, you'll see the Max Planck Institute sponsored on the front of Chemical and Engineering News just a few months ago. Still highly respected. Look, a little better, at least in perspective. Here you see the I can do it with the laser, right? Right here you see the on each of the wheels there's these big hydraulic lines. I have plenty more pictures. If they got into the PowerPoint, we'll call up the other pictures. But this picture was taken when I looked through this boarded window, and I did one of these, and there it was sitting there, and this truly ran with no input fuel. And I was flabbergasted. It's still today in this state. We went to the estate holders, and basically they told us, do it. There was an article in the Spokesman Review in Spokane, Washington, where his car didn't use any gasoline, and they actually published an article about the man. The big question everybody has is, with the technologies that we've already duplicated of Tesla's and the others that we continually, 3 different cancer estates, all of which are very effective in the treatment at virtually low to no cost, which is really where I was going with my patients, because once the doctors realized that they're nothing more than fancified car mechanics. Car uses gas, water, and air. Human body, people use food, water, and air. And basically, a real doctor is nothing more than a fancified car mechanic tweaking the carburetor of life, so to speak, or a janitor, where we're cleaning up the mess that people make of their body through toxicity, eating wrong lifestyles, and the rest of it. Doctors don't like to hear that. They get very upset. This brings them down from their podium. But we went went through a number of the different healthcare modalities. If we want to stick that other one in, I've got a bunch of pictures that people can take citations, because the technology I'm talking to you about is kind of like with the GEET people yesterday, where they said they want to get it out to people. Why we did studies, and the most of all, the technologies is what thrills me, because once you get into healthcare, everything is from the same basis, the oxidation reduction mechanism in the cell. And when you tell the doctors, they say, well, how can we sell something that does everything? One thing that does everything. And to me, when you're seeing patients and you're not charging a patient, you want what's most effective, gets them well the quickest, gets them out of your face, because you want to have a life too, and you don't want them coming back. If you can keep them from coming back, you want them to be well, because they aren't giving you money. And unless you really like to have them a fan club or some such thing, it's but the paybacks of seeing them successfully take care of cancer with something that costs $25, or at one time $15, or if you talk nice to the people, they'll give it to you for free. To me, is one of the greatest joys of working in healthcare. Start clicking.
There you should
I didn't do that one. I don't know how that went. That must be somebody else. Oh, this is the book. I didn't think I was going to go into it, but this book called Sinister Forces. This is the book that, when I found out how much Andrija Puharich was involved in Operation Mind Control, it's not talked about by Broward in his book Operation Mind Control, but I did the due diligence after he made the offer to purchase our therapies and take them off the market. I did some due diligence on him, and this is data about it. I don't know how much of it is legible, but it was very interesting to see that Broward didn't have any of the data. About Puharich, but he did about Joseph Lincoln Lawrence. And they wrote a book called Were We Controlled, which was about the implantation of radio communication devices in the teeth of Lee Harvey Oswald to turn him into a human robot. And it was interesting, because when I read it and I recognized Joseph Lincoln Lawrence's name, but there was no mention of Andrija Puharich. And I met Andrija at a psychotronics conference, and he took the therapy and got well and made that offer, and then we started studying the history, and the patients were coming in saying their teeth were talking to them. And my wife, who was a certified nurse practitioner in psychiatric nursing and worked in drug rehab and was a naturopath besides, started hearing not just her friend who was saying it, who was a hippie type, but some nationally known authors and healthcare practitioners, and telling us their teeth were talking to them. And my wife's kind of looking at me, and I'm looking at her. And we got down into the study of it, and it turned out that Andrija held the patent. In Where We Controlled, the book was about Oswald becoming a human robot through the Soviets implanting him. And the man that held the patent for the implantation of P&N junctions, semiconductors in the teeth of people, was a man by the name of Henry K. Puharich, who was Andrija Puharich. So these people got wind of a lot of his background, and they published a book called Sinister Forces. And yes, author Peter Levenda. The book is good. If you really want the skinny and real data on him, I have a huge file that comes out of the Defense Documentation Center in Alexandria, Virginia, and we have Andrija showed me what he was doing, what he was up to, and the reason for the Tesla watches was because it was just an extension of Operation Mind Control, and his whole premise about ELF and the woodpecker announcement of it, and protecting against the Earth's bad frequencies, and Tesla was doing bad frequencies, and he transmitted at 8 hertz and all the rest of it. It's baloney. Tesla made the statement that unless the frequency for the transmission of electrical energy without wires, unless the frequency is at least 10,000 meters in wavelength, then you're not going to have an efficient transmission of electrical energy, period. So the fabrication of ELF and the resulting hoopla that everybody was believing for a long period of time, and it's not true. He was doing it because he was working in the biofeedback range, and the biofeedback range of frequencies was what he was best able to entrain the nervous system with the watches, with another machine he had that he showed me where he put electrodes on the skin. And it was basically an extension of Operation Mind Control. I did it again. But how I know about Operation Mind Control was because of my own personal experience in the project and the things that I found that I'll speak about more in private than on the tape. But the two-facedness of the American government and the groups that seek to suppress all the technologies and things I'm speaking about, the two-facedness is mind-blowing. But my involvement in Operation Mind Control, 80% of the way into a project, they came up and said we were trying to keep a compound legal for distribution to the naturopaths in the naturopathic field because it came from a natural substance. And they said, what would you do if we told you that 80% of the people here that you're working with are CIA? And I said, I'm American. God bless America. You know, and that was my response. Basically, because my family's been in the whole military-industrial thing from the beginning. My second wife's grandfather was the man who discovered deuterium, that they made the hydrogen bomb out of, and he was kicked off the Manhattan Project. He won the Nobel Prize for his discovery of deuterium, Harold C. Urey, and he wasn't trying to make an atomic bomb out of it, or a weapon out of it, much the way Tesla wasn't trying to make weapons of war either, and did his whole thing with the machine to end all war. But what Harold C. Urey was trying to do, which we finally got to the bottom of, was he was trying to give hydrogen fuel, water power, hydrogen fuel, to the planet way back when. So at 101 years of age, he still was marching against the war in Vietnam and against nuclear power and the use of his discoveries as weapons. The reason I put these in, these are just some of the charters that the ANA holds on different universities. We actually held the charters for the oldest homeopathic colleges and different naturopathic chiropractic universities, and this was basically for another doctor who came to visit with me here. This is the oldest Washington Homeopathic Medical School in Washington, D.C. But here's the 11-hour bulletin, and this was a copy that was shown to me by the man that told me about the car at the bottom, about Velachos' car. The man over to the right is Konstantinos Velachos, who was pulled up out of the ocean, and his life was preserved, only to see his inventions never come to pass. Hopefully we'll all be able to work together to make it happen because it's very real. But on the left side, where it talks about the Koch therapy, it was the only black and white actually written citation that I had been told by the people who manufactured the Koch therapy, the Christian Medical Research League, and I was trained in the manufacture by the Christian Medical Research League chemist who was trained by Dr. Koch because I'm a homeopath, and it's a homeopathic compound. But it talks about Hitler being cured of throat cancer, and I had only been told that, and I happened to have access to this and duplicate it. But there's a number of articles and pictures of the car that Konstantinos Velachos, here it is right here, and again he's showing him with the other scientists, and these were just on and on. I mean, the technology, the line drawings and stuff. When you see it in real life, it's even more impressive than what he was doing. And this was like 1941, 1944. Actually, I think this paper was 1951. But this same technology, if you want your free energy, with the Tesla turbine and utilizing this as the power base, but instead of Freon, go to safer things like liquid air, and you have to go out looking. It's there, and it's simple technology. There's nothing very complex about it. The turbine, of course, I mean, is awesome, but the mechanical oscillator is very simple. It's all very simple tech. Again, talking about turbines, but all right. This was a patent and a picture, actual line drawing of the car itself. This car ran without gasoline. And this is posted in the front of what was his museum, only in white. Instead of being a negative, it's actually in black and white. But the implications of Tesla, the wide-ranging implications, this is the picture that finally showed me what Tesla was up to. And I can't really read the bottom of it, but essentially it says 10,000 years hence, this is where man will be living. And there won't be problems with inclement weathers. There won't be problems with diseases and germ bacteria, not that naturopaths don't even believe they exist anyways. Basically, our orientation is that they're recyclers, not germs that attack us. Much the way with cancer. Cancer is not something that attacks you. It's aberrative, your own cells that have gone aberrative. But here he talks about the floating city and the force field. That technology already is existent, and it's what I showed to the people with the government 4 to 5 years ago. It doesn't really look like that. That was an artist's rendition from the 1922 issue of Science and Invention. But the technologies are here now. I mean, it's not like we have to go researching and looking for them. If people truly want to see them or want to see them demonstrated, I wish I could have brought everything. I was going to bring my diesel pusher motor home and put it all in there, and was planning to bring it. And if I'm not 25 years out further to speak again, I will bring them, and I will show them. But we do have them on CD or DVD for people to look at. We have the paperwork to peruse and for people to go through, because it's time. It's time that the answers come out and that we really do what they're showing here. And it doesn't have to be up in the air; it can be on the ground, because it's a columnar wave, and nothing gets through it. And when you have an intentional community, we call it spa, resort, and natural healthcare living centers. When you have that kind of a community behind a force field, you can do what you please and be free the way you choose to be free, and do the technologies that you choose to do, and no longer do you have to worry about who's going to get you. And that's why it was important for us to pursue these technologies, and why we did. And this basically is the closing picture for my talk, and why we do what we're doing. So hopefully, in a spirit of cooperation, I'm there for anybody, anytime in healthcare, in the technologies, because we've taken the steps, we've done them, and we can optimize them even more so, or not optimize them, but make them in bigger sizes so that we can do just what they're showing here. So thank you for let me speak, and sorry I'm quite as dry as I am.
I think we've got time to take maybe two questions.
Oh.
So the first two people to the if we have one or two questions, we've got just about enough time to take one or two. Otherwise, if you guys want to expedite right to the break, that'll speed us along. And looks like we do have contestant number one. This question's right for you.